When I moved into my new neighborhood, I thought it was a peaceful community, perfect lawns, white fences, and friendly smiles. But soon, I learned that behind those smiles lurked someone who believed she ruled the block. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, she had a habit of poking into everyone's business, from how tall your grass was to what color your mailbox should be. But what crossed the line was when she started stealing my mail. It began subtly. A missing package here, a letter that never arrived there. At first, I blamed the postal service, but one afternoon I caught a glimpse of her, that smug look, those oversized sunglasses, and her little dog trotting by as she casually opened my mailbox and took something out. My blood boiled. I confronted her, but she denied it with that fake laugh, saying she was just checking for HOA violations. That's when I decided to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. I wasn't going to call the police or file complaints. She always found her way out of those. Instead, I took matters into my own hands. I wired my mailbox with a small electric current, safe but strong enough to shock anyone who tried to meddle. That next morning, I sat on my porch with my coffee, pretending to read the paper. Right on time, Karen strutted over, nosy as ever. The moment her hand touched that mailbox handle, zap, her scream echoed through the cul-de-sac. Everyone turned to look. Her dog barked. I couldn't help but smile behind my mug. Justice had finally been served neighborhood style. Asterisk, the day I moved into Maplewood Estates. The sun was shining, the breeze was light, and everything looked like it had come straight out of a suburban dream. Rows of neatly trimmed lawns glowed in the daylight, each home painted in soft pastel colors with flower beds that looked almost professionally arranged. Children were riding bicycles, dogs were being walked, and the faint hum of lawnmowers mixed with birdsong in the background. After years of noisy apartments and cramped city life, this was supposed to be peace, my quiet, perfect new start. The moving truck had barely pulled away when I noticed her. She appeared almost magically, as if she had been waiting for me. A middle-aged woman, tall and sharp-featured with short blonde hair that didn't move even in the wind. She wore a white polo shirt tucked neatly into her beige shorts, and on her chest hung a shiny badge that read, Maplewood HOA Chairperson. The way she carried herself made it clear this was her kingdom. Good morning, she called out with a wide smile that looked more like a practiced expression than genuine warmth. You must be the new homeowner. I'm Karen. I run the Homeowners Association around here. I smiled politely, wiping my hands on my jeans. Hi. Yeah, I'm Daniel. Just moved in from the city. Oh, how lovely, she said, looking me up and down like she was inspecting a new recruit. Well, welcome to Maplewood Estates. We're a very close-knit community here. We have a few rules to keep everything orderly. I nodded, though her tone made me feel like I'd already broken one. As she spoke, her eyes darted everywhere, the paint on my front door, the slightly uneven edge of my lawn, even the boxes stacked by my driveway. She noticed everything. You'll want to keep your grass trimmed exactly 2-3 inches, she continued. And please make sure your trash cans are not visible from the street. We pride ourselves on our uniformity. Of course, I said, keeping my tone friendly. I'll take care of it. Karen smiled again, though her smile didn't soften her eyes. I'm sure you will, she said, and then added, we have monthly inspections, by the way, just to make sure everyone's following the rules. I'll drop by the HOA welcome packet later today. And with that, she walked off, her little white dog trotting behind her, leash jingling. I watched her go, half amused, half unsettled. I'd heard about HOA Karens before, but I didn't expect to meet one within my first 10 minutes of moving in. For the rest of the day, I unpacked. Every so often, I'd see her walking by again, sometimes pretending to check her mailbox or water her plants, but I could tell she was watching. My neighbor across the street, an older man named Mark, waved and came over. New in town? He asked. Yeah, just moved in. Seems like a nice place, I replied. Mark chuckled, lowering his voice. It is, mostly. Just keep your head low around Karen. She runs the HOA like it's the military. I laughed. She already stopped by to give me a lecture about lawn height. Oh, that's just the start, he said. She's been here 10 years and thinks she owns the place. Watch your mail too. She loves to check for violations. She once opened my mail because she thought I didn't pay my HOA dues on time. She opened your mail? I asked, surprised. Yep, he said with a shrug. Said she was helping. I told her that's a federal crime. She said she was just making sure the neighborhood stayed organized. I shook my head, half thinking he was joking. That's crazy. You'll see, he said. Welcome to Maplewood. After he left, I brushed off the conversation. Surely it couldn't be that bad. Maybe she was just overzealous. Every neighborhood has someone like that, the one who takes rules too seriously. I figured I'd just stay polite, follow the basics, and keep to myself. By the afternoon, I was setting up my porch furniture when I noticed Karen again. She was standing across the street, pretending to check her phone, but I caught her glancing toward me several times. I waved, just to be polite. She didn't wave back, she just turned around and walked off briskly. Later that day, as promised, she showed up with the HOA welcome packet. It was a thick envelope filled with printed pages, outlining neighborhood regulations, everything From acceptable mailbox styles to what color your blinds should be visible from the street. It even included an approved list of front door colors, which didn't surprise me. "I see you have a black mailbox," she said, eyeing it critically. "We preferred dark bronze or forest green to match the community aesthetic. It was here when I bought the house." I said, "Well," she replied with that same tight smile, "you might want to replace it. We wouldn't want to receive complaints." I nodded, biting back the urge to tell her that she was the complaint. She stood there for another minute, glancing over my property as if committing every detail to memory. "Everything looks fine so far," she said finally. "Oh, and make sure your recycling bins are only out on Tuesdays between 7 and 9 a.m. We don't want clutter." "Got it," I said, forcing a smile. She left, but I could feel the invisible leash of her authority already tightening around my neck as evening approached. I walked down the block to get a better sense of the neighborhood. Every house looked nearly identical, perfectly trimmed lawns, evenly spaced mailboxes, and porch decorations that seemed designed to match. It was almost eerie how uniform it was. The people, too, seemed friendly but cautious, like everyone knew to stay on Karen's good side. By the time I got home, I found a small slip of paper taped to my front door. It was an HOA notice written by Karen, of course, reminding me to remove a small moving box from my driveway because visible clutter can negatively impact neighborhood aesthetics. It had been less than 12 hours since I moved in that night. As I sat on my porch watching the golden sunset wash over the perfect lawns, I realized that Maplewood Estates wasn't just peaceful, it was controlled. Every blade of grass, every fence post, every mailbox color seemed dictated by an invisible hand, and that hand belonged to Karen. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I'd come here for quiet, for a fresh start. I didn't want trouble. I could handle one nosy neighbor, but deep down I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this woman, this self-queen of perfection, was going to make my life a lot more complicated than I had planned. The last thing I saw before going inside was Karen standing by her window across the street, her silhouette framed by the fading daylight. She wasn't watering plants or walking her dog this time. She was just watching my house, still, silent, and unblinking. And for the first time that day, I wondered if moving to Maplewood Estates had been a mistake. A week passed, and life in Maplewood Estates settled into a quiet rhythm, at least on the surface. Every morning, I'd step onto my porch with a mug of coffee, taking in the soft hum of sprinklers and the smell of freshly cut grass. It all looked so peaceful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the way Karen's curtains always twitched whenever I walked outside, or how she somehow managed to bump into me every other day with a new reminder about HOA rules. Whatever it was, that sense of being watched never went away. It started small, one missing letter. My sister had sent me a handwritten card to celebrate my move. She told me over the phone that she mailed it on Monday. By Friday, it hadn't shown up. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it got delayed. But then, the next week, a package I ordered online vanished too. The tracking said delivered, but my mailbox was empty. I called the postal service. They confirmed it had been dropped off at my address. I checked with my neighbors, but no one had seen anything. When I told Mark, the man across the street, he gave me a knowing look. "Let me guess," he said. "You think Karen might have taken it?" I frowned. "That's crazy, right? Who steals mail in broad daylight?" He shrugged. "Karen does whatever she wants. Last year, she opened a neighbor's water bill because she claimed it wasn't properly addressed. The HOA let her off with a warning." I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but something about his tone told me he wasn't joking. That evening, I sat on my porch and watched. Around 10 in the morning, Karen came out with her dog, like clockwork. She walked past each house, occasionally glancing at mailboxes as if checking for something. When she reached mine, she slowed down, not stopping, but her eyes lingered a second too long. By the third missing item, I couldn't ignore it anymore. This time it was a small box containing replacement keys I had ordered. Again, the tracking showed delivered, but my mailbox was empty when I got home from work. My patience snapped. I decided to test a theory. The next morning, I slipped an empty, padded envelope into my mailbox. On it, I wrote in big letters, "Property of the Federal Postal Service, do not tamper." Inside, I placed a folded piece of paper that said, "Smile, you're on camera." Then, I set up a small security camera hidden among the bushes facing the mailbox. It wasn't fancy, but it recorded directly to my phone. The first day, nothing happened. The second day, the mailman came, dropped off some letters, and left. Later that morning, I saw Karen stroll by with her little white dog, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the sun. She passed my driveway, then stopped. She looked around, pretending to adjust her shoe, but her eyes darted toward my mailbox. She glanced up and down the street. No one else was around. Then she reached out, pulled open the mailbox door, and slipped her hand inside. My heart raced as I watched the live feed on my phone. She froze for a moment when she saw the bold letters on the fake envelope. Her face twisted into a frown, and she quickly shut the mailbox. But not before I got a clear, unmistakable shot of her hand in my box, her smug face caught perfectly by the camera. That night, I replayed the footage over and over. There was no doubt she was the one stealing my mail. I couldn't believe it. The same woman who preached about community standards was committing a federal offense right on my property. I thought about confronting her immediately. But Mark warned me to be careful. If you go straight at her, she twists it. She'll say she was checking for violations or looking for misdelivered mail. She always has an excuse. He was right. Karen had power in this neighborhood, too much of it. The HOA board listened to her, and most of the neighbors feared her. I needed to be smart. The next day she approached me while I was trimming my hedge, as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, Daniel," she said cheerfully. "I noticed your trash cans were still out after pickup yesterday. Remember, they need to be put away within an hour." I forced a smile. "I'll remember next time." Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she could sense my sarcasm. "Also, a reminder," she continued, "it's against HOA rules to install any outdoor cameras without prior approval." My stomach dropped. How did she know? "Cameras," I said casually. "I don't have any cameras." "Oh," she said, tilting her head. "Maybe I was mistaken. I just noticed something shiny near your mailbox yesterday. I wouldn't want you to violate our privacy guidelines." There it was, that subtle threat under the sweetness of her voice. I wanted to tell her off, to show her the footage and watch her face crumble, but something in her tone made me pause. She was too confident, too connected. If I exposed her now, she'd likely twist it against me, accuse me of harassment, or claim I was spying on her, so I decided to wait. Let her think she'd gotten away with it. For the next few days, I kept recording. She didn't touch the mailbox again immediately, but I knew she would. People like Karen couldn't help themselves. Their sense of control was an addiction. Sure enough, on Friday morning, she tried again. This time, she didn't even hesitate. She walked straight up to my mailbox, opened it, and pulled out a letter. The moment she did, I stepped out from behind my car and said, loud and clear, "Need something, Karen." She froze, letter in hand, her face turning pale. "Oh, Daniel. I was just touching if this was Mr. Sometimes the postman mixes up addresses, and as HOA chair, it's my duty too." I cut her off. "That's my electric bill. You really think it belongs to someone else?" she stammered, her confidence cracking for the first time. I was just trying to help by committing mail theft," I asked calmly. "You do know that's a federal crime, right?" Her lips tightened, and she quickly shoved the letter back into my mailbox. "You don't need to be rude," she said sharply. "I was only being neighborly," I said, stepping closer. "You've been stealing from me since the day I moved in." She glared, her mask of politeness gone. "Be careful, Daniel. People who make false accusations around here don't last long." Then she turned and stormed off, her dog barking as if echoing her anger. I stood there, my hands trembling, part adrenaline, part rage. I knew then that Karen wasn't going to stop. She didn't see herself as a thief or a bully. She saw herself as in charge, and as long as she felt untouchable, she'd keep doing whatever she wanted. But this time, I wasn't going to play nice that night. As I watched the footage again, an idea began to form, something bold, something that would make sure she never touched my mailbox again. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And if the HOA queen wanted to keep poking her nose where it didn't belong, I was going to make sure she got a shocking reminder to stay out. I smiled to myself as I turned off the lights. The game had just begun. I spent the next day pacing my kitchen like someone waiting for a storm. The footage on my phone played back in little jerky clips. Karen's hand, her face, that same smug look, and every replay made me angrier and more determined. But anger is different from action. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I felt the heavy weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about my mail anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been tolerated for too long. I didn't want to escalate things in a way that could hurt someone or land me in trouble. So I forced myself to slow down and think. If I acted rashly, Karen would have all the power to twist the story. If I acted smart, I could remove her authority and make sure she couldn't hurt people the way she'd hurt me and others. I made a list, not a wiring diagram or a plan for revenge, but a list of options that wouldn't expose me to legal risks. At the top, I put evidence, more footage, clearer timestamps, a pattern that couldn't be dismissed as an accident. Then I added people, not adversaries, but allies. I knocked on Mark's door and, with the door cracked open, explained everything without hyperbole. He didn't look surprised. He'd known something like this would happen, he said, and had a small stack of stories about misplaced packages and helpful HOA checks. He agreed to watch his camera feed more closely and to talk to a few neighbors who, quietly, had had similar experiences but were afraid to speak up. Next, I spoke to Mrs. Alvarez 2 houses down. She was in her 70s, a retired schoolteacher who always knitted on her porch. I told her about the footage and asked if she would be willing to act as a witness if things escalated. Her face softened with concern. "We can't let someone take what isn't theirs," she said, adjusting her glasses. "But don't do anything that will put you or anyone else at risk. Let's do this properly." Her tone grounded me. Properly meant involving more than one person, documenting everything, and, if necessary, going to the authorities with facts rather than accusations. Once I had a few neighbors on board, We plotted a sting that felt more like a neighborhood watch operation than a vigilante scheme. We picked a morning when most people would be home, a Saturday, when the kids were usually at soccer practice but neighbors often lingered on porches. I told them I wanted to be absolutely certain before making any accusations, and they agreed to act natural but to keep eyes on the mailbox area. Mark volunteered to angle his camera so it could capture the sidewalk better. Mrs. Alvarez said she would sit on her porch with her binoculars and a notepad. A younger couple a few houses down said they'd pretend to water their plants and could call out if they saw anyone suspicious. It felt strangely comforting to have a small, ordinary army assembled for such an ordinary task. We also took steps to make interference obvious and harmless, rather than rigging anything dangerous, which I had thought about in a moment of fury but immediately rejected. I bought tamper-evident tape and a bright sticker that read, "Under video surveillance." The sticker was deliberately loud. It made a point without threatening harm. In my mind, I pictured Karen's face when she read it, but I knew a sticker alone wouldn't stop her if she believed she was above rules. The tape would at least make it clear if someone had rifled through my mail. That matter-of-fact evidence could be shown to the post office or law enforcement. A busted seal, a handprint on the tape, a time-stamped video. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. The morning of the sting, the sunlight painted the houses a soft, forgiving gold that made the whole operation feel oddly mundane. I felt like a conspirator in a small-town play. Neighbors took their positions. Mark's camera whirred quietly in the background. The couple pretended to busy themselves with trimming a hedge, and Mrs. Alvarez nodded at me from her porch where she sat, knitting abandoned in her lap. I put a marked envelope in the mailbox, nothing valuable, just a notice I had printed that said, "This is evidence." I closed the mailbox, sealed it with the tape, and put the sticker on the front. Then I went back inside and made coffee, hands shaking a little though I tried to pretend they weren't. We didn't have to wait long. Karen's routine was dependable in a way that had once comforted the neighborhood and now irritated me. She walked with purpose, a leash in one hand, sunglasses on, phone in the other. She moved across the street and surveyed the block like a woman making notes in her head. When she reached my mailbox, she slowed almost ceremoniously and I could see her glance at the sticker. For a second she read it and smiled a small, inscrutable smile. Whether she smirked because she thought the sticker was a joke or because she believed herself above it, I couldn't tell. Then she touched the tape gently, as if to feel its strength, and her fingers paused on the sealed dot. At that exact second, Mark stepped out and called across the street, loud and outward, "Beautiful day, huh?" The casual voice carried the weight of a signal. Mrs. Alvarez raised her hand and waved her knitting in the air. The little interlude designed to let Karen know the street was being watched. I stood in my doorway, pretending to rake leaves, feeling the pulse in my neck as time seemed to stretch. Karen hesitated. And then infuriatingly, she slid the tape aside as if she was removing a tiny obstacle. She reached into the mailbox, pulled out the evidence envelope, and opened it in one practiced motion. The rustling of the paper was a small sound, but in that moment it felt louder than a thunderclap. Her expression changed from smug to an uncomfortable tightness when she found the printed notice about being evidence. She looked up, her eyes flicking to Mark's camera, to Mrs. Alvarez, to me. A tight, almost guilty color crept into her cheeks, but she didn't apologize. Instead, she tucked the paper into her bag like a woman tucking away proof she didn't want anyone to read. For a heartbeat I thought she would bolt, but then she straightened and put on that practiced smile. "What's going on?" she called, loud enough that the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Mark walked over casually, cameras swinging on his shoulder like a badge of normalcy. "Oh, just making sure everything's in order," he said. "We noticed someone doing some unusual checks this week." His voice was flat, careful. Mrs. Alvarez stood and crossed the street with a calmness that made me proud. "We've had a few things go missing," she said. We thought it best to watch. Karen's mouth opened and closed. Denial threaded through her voice as she tried to twist the narrative, scoffing about being watched. But this time she couldn't produce the usual confidence that silenced neighbors. Her hands were empty, and for the first time the mask of authority she'd worn for so long looked thin and vulnerable. A few others had come out, drawn like moths to a porch light of trouble, and their faces showed the same mixture of surprise and relief. They had suspected but had been too frightened to act alone. Now, faced with a small crowd and clear evidence, Karen's bluster stuttered. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I showed the footage on my phone to anyone who wanted to see it, then handed it politely to Mrs. Alvarez so she could keep a copy. The images spoke for themselves. No commentary needed. People murmured, and a few nodded. The sound of a community awakening. Someone suggested calling the post office. Someone else suggested an HOA meeting. I listened, feeling that odd lift in my chest that comes when small injustices begin to be checked by ordinary people doing ordinary things. Karen left that day with her head bowed more than I had ever seen before. She muttered about misunderstandings and promises of looking into things. But the easy arrogance she'd worn for years had been stripped, briefly and publicly. As she walked away, I had no thrill of triumph. What I felt was relief, a lightness that came from doing the right thing the right way. We hadn't hurt anyone. We had simply documented, witnessed, and refused to let fear silence us. That evening, the neighborhood felt different, as if someone had opened a window and let fresh air sweep through. Neighbors chatted on porches, more openly than before. Mark and I exchanged numbers with half the street for a new, unofficial watch. The sticker still sat on my mailbox, a bright, ordinary sign that said, in the least dramatic way possible, we were paying attention now. I went to bed that night exhausted but calm, knowing that the next move wouldn't be mine alone. It would be in the hands of a small, watchful community and the processes that exist to protect people when they are used. The game had changed, and however it ended, it would end with the truth out in the open. The week after the confrontation felt strangely calm, unnaturally so. Karen didn't come to my door, didn't make her usual morning rounds, and for the first time since I moved in, I didn't see her standing by her window watching the street. Maplewood Estates almost felt like a normal neighborhood again. People waved to one another. Kids played on the sidewalks without getting scolded for noise violations, and even the air felt lighter. But deep down, I knew the silence wouldn't last. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. She thrived on control, and I had embarrassed her publicly. That wasn't something she would forgive. On Tuesday morning, I found proof that she was still up to something. When I went to check my mailbox, there was a folded HOA notice taped to it. No envelope, no stamp, just a paper left there deliberately. It read, "Dear resident, we've received multiple complaints about potential electrical tampering and unapproved modifications to your property. Please remove any devices or wiring from your mailbox immediately. HOA compliance check scheduled for Friday. Karen, HOA chair." I stared at the letter in disbelief. I hadn't installed anything electrical yet, at least. Not then. She was trying to preempt me, to accuse me before I could even defend myself. It was her way of taking back power, of twisting the narrative again. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to catch her anymore. I was going to stop her. I wanted her to understand consequences, not just embarrassment. I didn't want to hurt her, but I wanted her to think twice before touching anything that didn't belong to her ever again. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I ordered a low-voltage current device online, the kind electricians use for testing. Safe but strong enough to create a sharp, surprising jolt. It wasn't dangerous. It was the same amount of electricity you'd feel from a static discharge or a faulty doorknob shock. I tested it on myself first. It made me jump, but it didn't leave a mark. Perfect. The setup was simple. I ran a thin wire along the back edge of the mailbox door, connected to the device hidden inside a weatherproof casing beneath the post. The current would activate only when someone opened the lid, and only if they touched the metal handle. It wouldn't run continuously, just for that brief instant. To anyone who wasn't snooping, it was completely harmless, but for someone who couldn't resist meddling, well, it would be a memorable experience. Friday morning arrived, bright and cloudless. The street was quiet, sunlight bouncing off car windows and lawns glistening from the early sprinkler mist. I set a chair on my porch, poured myself a cup of coffee, and pretended to read the newspaper. My phone was recording not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because I wanted evidence if she tried to spin another story at exactly 10:12 a.m. Like clockwork, I saw her. Karen emerged from her house wearing oversized sunglasses and her HOA badge proudly clipped to her shirt. Her little white dog trotted beside her, nails clicking on the pavement. Even from across the street, I could tell she was still seething under that forced composure. She paused at every house, pretending to check fences and trash bins, clearly making a show for anyone who might be watching. Then she reached my driveway. My heart started pounding. She looked around, then stepped up to my mailbox. She stared at it for a moment, maybe remembering the last time she'd been caught. Then, with a huff, she reached for the handle. The second her fingers made contact, a sharp crack sounded, ZZZT, followed by her startled yelp. She jerked her hand back, stumbling a step. The dog barked frantically, leash tangling around her legs. She let out a high-pitched squeal, the kind of sound that drew attention instantly. Curtains shifted, doors opened. A few neighbors peeked out, curious what in the world. She shouted, rubbing her hand and glaring at my mailbox as if it had personally insulted her. I sipped my coffee, keeping my expression neutral. "Something wrong, Karen," I called calmly. She spun around, face flushed red. "Your mailbox shocked me." I raised an eyebrow. "That's strange. Mailboxes don't usually do that unless someone's trying to open them without permission." Her jaw tightened. "That's illegal. You can't booby-trap your property." "I didn't booby-trap anything," I said evenly. "It's just static from the metal. Maybe you should stop touching other people's mailboxes." By now, several neighbors had gathered nearby, whispering behind hands and trying not to laugh. Mark was among them, hiding a smirk behind his coffee mug. Mrs. Alvarez stood at her gate, eyebrows raised. Her expression caught somewhere between shock and satisfaction. Karen's face went from red to purple. "I'm calling the police," she barked. "Good idea," I replied. "You can explain to them why you were opening my mailbox in the first place. I'm sure they'll love to hear that." Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She realized, in that moment, that she had no defense. The same crowd she once commanded now stood watching her unravel. The power she wielded with intimidation had crumbled. A few minutes later, she stomped back to her house, dog in tow, muttering under her breath. The street stayed quiet except for a few muffled laughs. I exhaled, finally letting myself relax. Later that afternoon, a police cruiser did show up, but not for me. An officer knocked on my door politely and asked what had happened. I showed him the footage, explained that I had installed a harmless deterrent to protect my mail from theft. He watched the video and nodded. "She's lucky you didn't press charges," he said. "Technically, she's the one committing a federal offense." I smiled faintly. I just wanted her to stop. When he left, I sat back on my porch listening to the hum of distant lawnmowers and birds overhead. For the first time, I truly felt like I owned my peace again. No more stolen mail. No more unwanted intrusions. Just calm. Over the next few days, something changed in the neighborhood. People walked a little freer. Conversations grew warmer. Without Karen's constant patrols and passive-aggressive notes, Maplewood Estates started to feel like a community again, the kind I'd hoped for when I moved in. I'd see her occasionally, but always from a distance. She avoided my side of the street completely now, crossing to the other sidewalk whenever she walked her dog. She never mentioned the mailbox again, never filed a complaint, never even made eye contact. Her reign of control had ended, not with an HOA meeting or a police report, but with a single jolt of justice. That weekend, Mark and a few neighbors invited me for a small backyard barbecue. As the sun dipped low, laughter echoed across the lawns, and someone joked about the legend of the electric mailbox. Everyone laughed, even Mrs. Alvarez, who raised her glass and said, "Two boundaries, may we all finally have them respected." I lifted my drink and smiled. The golden light stretched across the street, catching the calm shimmer of my no-guarded mailbox. Karen's house windows stayed dark, her blinds drawn tight. For the first time since I moved to Maplewood Estates, I felt like I truly belonged. Weeks passed since the electric mailbox incident, and the entire neighborhood still buzzed about it. Karen's humiliating yelp had become the stuff of Maplewood legend. Kids reenacted it on the sidewalk, complete with exaggerated jumps and mock gasps. For once, the laughter wasn't at someone's expense, it was a collective sigh of relief, the sound of people realizing they didn't have to live in fear anymore. But not everyone was convinced that peace would last. Mark said it best one evening as we stood by the fence, watching the sunset bleed orange and gold across the rooftops. "You know her, man. Karen doesn't quit. She's probably just planning her next move." I nodded. I'd been thinking the same thing. There was a tension in the air, not visible, but felt. The way her curtains never opened, the absence of her daily walks, the eerie quiet from her house at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was like she was waiting for something. Then one morning, that something arrived. A sleek black SUV pulled into Karen's driveway, its tinted windows gleaming under the sun. Out stepped a sharply dressed man carrying a leather briefcase. Within minutes, two more vehicles followed, one marked with a county seal. Neighbors peeked through blinds as uniformed officers stepped out, along with a woman wearing a badge that read Federal Postal Inspector. I froze mid-sip of my coffee. Postal Inspector. My mind flashed back to every piece of mail Karen had ever meddled with, not just mine, but everyone's. The stolen letters, the misplaced packages, the mysterious fines and notices that never reached their recipients. She hadn't just been nosy, she'd been committing a federal crime. Mark appeared at my side, eyes wide. "You seeing this?" "Oh, I'm seeing it," I said quietly. Over the next hour, officers went in and out of her house, carrying boxes, file folders, and what looked like bundles of opened envelopes. Karen stood in her doorway, arguing furiously, her voice sharp and desperate, but her words carried no power now. She was surrounded by authority she couldn't intimidate. Eventually, the inspectors escorted her to the SUV. She shouted something about a misunderstanding, insisting she'd only been protecting the community. No one believed her. For years, she'd used that phrase as a shield for her control. Now it was just an empty excuse. As the vehicles drove off, a strange hush fell over the street. It wasn't the kind of silence born from fear, but from awe. Maplewood Estates, once ruled by a woman obsessed with power, was finally free. By afternoon, the news had spread like wildfire. Word got around that Karen had been under investigation for months. After multiple residents filed federal complaints about tampering with their mail, my video evidence of her earlier trespassing had apparently helped the case. She was facing several charges, including interference with federal property. It was surreal. I never imagined my attempt to defend a simple mailbox would lead to the downfall of the neighborhood tyrant. That evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting in the community park, without Karen there to dominate the conversation. It felt normal. People actually smiled. Mrs. Alvarez volunteered to temporarily oversee the board until a proper election could be held. "We're going to rebuild," she said. "And this time, no one rules by fear." Applause erupted. For the first time, neighbors talked about real improvements, repainting the old sign, adding new benches, organizing a block party. Hope replaced the tension that had hung over us for so long. As the meeting ended, I wandered back toward my house. The sky was a soft lavender, and the warm breeze carried laughter from across the lawns. For the first time, Maplewood Estates felt like a home. Mark joined me at the fence again, sipping a beer. You know, you kind of started this whole revolution, he said with a grin. Nah, I chuckled. I just wanted to keep my mail safe. Yeah, and in the process, you took down the HOA dictator. He raised his bottle, to justice, electric or otherwise. We both laughed, clinking bottles. Later that night, as I sat on my porch watching the stars blink into view, I thought about Karen. For all her cruelty and control, part of me felt a twinge of pity. Maybe she started with good intentions, wanting to make the neighborhood better, but somewhere along the way, that power had consumed her. The need to control had turned her into a villain in her own story. The next morning, a new letter arrived, this time delivered properly. It was from the temporary HOA board. The opening line made me smile. Dear residents, effective immediately. All HOA policies previously enforced under the former chairperson are suspended for review. We will rebuild this association together with fairness, transparency, and respect for every homeowner. Underneath, several neighbors had signed their names. Real names, not anonymous complaints, not forged letters. Genuine signatures. I pinned the letter to my fridge. It wasn't just paper. It was proof that we'd taken back our community. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the neighborhood healed. The lawns grew greener, fences were mended, and laughter returned to the air. Even the mail carrier smiled when he stopped by, probably relieved he could finally do his job without interference. One afternoon, I checked the mailbox again. The hum of the electrical device was long gone, but it didn't matter anymore. The mailbox stood like a silent monument, a reminder that even small acts of resistance can spark real change. As I looked around, I realized how different everything felt. The oppressive stillness had vanished. People waved, shared jokes, and planned weekend cookouts. Maplewood Estates had finally become what it was always meant to be, a neighborhood, not a dictatorship. I sat back on my porch swing, feeling the warm sunlight on my face. It had been a long journey from a quiet homeowner to the accidental hero of a suburban revolution, but as peaceful laughter echoed down the street, I knew one thing for sure: peace was worth a fight. And as for Karen, no one saw her again. Rumor had it she'd sold her house and moved out of state. Maybe she'd find a new neighborhood. Maybe even a new cause. But if she did, I hoped she'd remember Maplewood and the mailbox that taught her that boundaries matter. For now, all was calm. The mail arrived on time, neighbors smiled freely, and Maplewood Estates was finally alive again, without fear, without control, without Karen. I raised my glass toward the mailbox and smiled. Peace finally delivered,